Hello, everyone, and welcome to Salt Lake City's My Voice, My Census, My Future Town Hall for the Black community. We are lucky to be joined today by some talented community leaders who will help get to the heart of why we are completing this census and why it is so important. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight and having this discussion. It's our hope that by talking about all of the far-reaching impacts the census has, that we'll be able to encourage more people to complete it. I want to be clear here at the beginning that there are no downsides for any individual for completing the census. The personal information gathered, names, ages, addresses, and everything else is protected, and it stays with the Census Bureau. It's not shared with law enforcement or other agencies. Our panelists are going to explain more about that and how the data is used by the Census Bureau, but I think it's worth noting repeatedly because misconceptions about the census are one of the main reasons people choose not to take it. Like other cities throughout this country, people of color are underrepresented in Salt Lake City. An accurate census is a vitally important part of correcting that. When African American communities are undercounted, political boundaries may not accurately represent reality. Undercounting results in being denied a full voice in policy decision making. As a result, different community needs may not be represented or prioritized according to their real share of the population. One last thing I'm excited to talk about is that today we announced Rose Park Connect. It's a collaboration with Salt Lake County and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to provide access to Wi-Fi, addressing that digital divide in Salt Lake City. And it also connects people with computers for people in the Rose Park area. People can use the computer lab of the Rose Park Stake Center of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is at 760 North, 1200 West. Community members can complete the 2020 census at this facility and do any other online tasks they may need. The facility will be open Monday and Wednesday from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and Tuesday and Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. Physical distancing will be followed, and those who use the services there are asked to wear masks. With that, I'm happy to turn the time over to our wonderful moderator, Shawn Newell, the director of the Utah Multicultural Civic Council. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Mendenhall. It's wonderful to spend this evening with you and the rest of our distinguished guests. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We have some panelists here, and we have a great opportunity to share some information and to also hear from you, the community. With this evening, we have Betty Sawyer, who is the president of the Ogden branch of the NAACP and also the executive director of Project Success. We have Jasmine Walton, who is with NeighborWorks. We have Representative Sandra Hollins with us this evening. Thank you, Representative Hollins, for taking the time to be with us. And we have Mr. James Jackson, who is the executive director of the Utah Black Chamber of Commerce. So what I want to do right now is take an opportunity to have each of these individuals introduce themselves and tell us real quickly why they're here this evening and why they feel this discussion about the census is important. Betty, I'll have you take it first.
Good evening again to everyone, and I'm excited to be here to talk about the importance of the census and how relevant that is to all of us. As the mayor stated, we're often underrepresented as a community, and it impacts us disproportionately in so many areas. And so I'm here to lend my voice to say, yes, it's about our future, it's about the census, but it begins with the actions that we take today. So encouraging everyone, if you have not filled out the census, to do that immediately.
Wonderful. Jasmine, can you give us a little insight as to a little more about you and why you're here this evening?
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. So good evening, everyone. I'm Jasmine Walton. I am from NeighborWorks Salt Lake. We're a community development organization that works in neighborhoods of choice and predominantly here on the west side of Salt Lake. I'm excited to be here tonight because The census is so important. This is also my first time completing the census as a young person. So I'm excited to encourage all of my other young people out there to take the census, explain why it's important, how you can help your other family members take the census. So really excited to be here tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Representative Hollins, I think most people know who you are, but please share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Good evening to everyone. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Mayor Mendenhall, for your willingness to have this important conversation. I'm here because I represent the west side of Salt Lake City, District 23. And historically, the West Side has had a low turnout and turning in their census or completing the census, and that is impacting our community. So I'm here to encourage the West Side community to complete the census, to address those myths that's around filling out the census, and hopefully we'll have higher numbers this year.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. James Jackson, who's with he is the Executive Director of the Utah Black Chamber of Commerce. Take a moment, James, and tell us about yourself and what you do with the Chamber of Commerce and some of your interests in the census.
Sure. Thank you, Shawn, for the introduction. James Jackson III, founder and executive director of the Utah Black Chamber. I am a native Utahn, and I've seen the progress that Utah has made as far as increasing in diversity. And as the Black Chamber grows to ensure that there are resources and education for not only Black businesses, but also for the Black professionals as they work to thrive here in Utah, it's important that we have all Black individuals counted to ensure that those resources are in place. Also, as people travel or relocate into Utah, I would love to try to change the narrative and the perception of what people have about Utah, and that we do have a growing diversity and that we have a place that is becoming more and more welcoming for everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. To get this conversation started off, I wanted to get a little context interjected here. The census, for those that don't know, only comes around every 10 years. So whatever decisions we make, being positive or negative, which tonight we're going to talk about participation, impact us for the next years. Right now, the federal government has almost $6 billion allocated to Utah. Now, we only receive these dollars based on the amount of participation we have by our citizens. So we're here this evening to really call out to the Black community and other communities, for that fact, to come out and really participate. As Mayor Mendenhall mentioned, it's not a scary place to be. There was a lot of fear put into the media and so forth to try to stop people from participating, but that's really not something that we should be concerned about right now. What we should be concerned about is our future for the next 2 years, what impacts we're going to have on our community, and the funding that's available to things like education, food programs, transportation, all these things that impact us as citizens of this great state. So one of the first questions I'm going to push out to everyone is, the census or the impact of the census have on the Black community? We'll go in reverse order this time, and we'll have James answer that question for us.
I'm sorry, you said reverse order, and you wanted me to answer? I just want to be sure.
I got you.
I have my dog barking in the background, so I wanted to be sure I understood right. As you just mentioned, education is a huge piece as far as the Black community is concerned. You know, our focus within the Black Chamber and myself has always been on economic development and having that education available to learn and grow. And as we're all aware, when we talk about equity, the Black community has been behind for so long just because of the systemic racism that's been into our system, since the beginning of time. And so not being counted further prohibits us to engage further in when we don't have the access to education, especially in underrepresented areas such as Rose Park and Glendale and other areas that, that Representative Hollins really leads on. And so it's important that we have those resources in place, that we do provide those numbers, get the funding available so we can increase the resources available for education. That's the biggest component for me when I think about economic development, providing resources for businesses to grow, have more access to grants. It all starts with education.
Wonderful. Thank you Thank you, James, for that. Representative Hollins.
Yes, and I would agree with a lot what James Jackson said. It's because this is going to impact what is important to us as the Black community. This impacts Pell Grants. It impacts housing. It impacts almost every aspect of education. And so this is what is important to us, even down to our representation in the political arena. The census impact that. So it's important to the Black community because it impacts everything that is important to us.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Jasmine, you're also in the west part of our I should say, our community. What are you seeing as some of the impacts that might greatly affect the Black community?
Yeah, so definitely, I think I mimic what both James and Representative Holland said. Especially here on the West Side, we're seeing, a lack of resources when it comes to schooling, right, with our school-aged kids. Like the lunch programs will be impacted, right? The census dollars really do travel really far for our community here on the West Side, especially because a lot of Black people in our community are renters, right? And so we're seeing that the housing market's being affected. We're seeing that lack of representation, like Representative Holland said. So completing the census is very important. We want to be able to provide more resources, more allocation, more representation.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Betty, you're close, especially in the Ogden area, with a lot of youth and your work you do with youth. Can you give us a little insight as to the impact the census has on some of the programs that are there to take care of our young people?
Yes, Project Success Coalition itself is a nonprofit that has been in existence for 31 years. And we focused on education, health, and cultural arts. And all of those areas are directly impacted by the census and the dollars that come along with our representation. As you know, generally a little less than $2,000 per person is what that economic impact of filling out the census. So if we are not filling that out, we can clearly see that as we do that across a whole community of people, that economic impact can be devastating. It'd be a great loss. So it's already been mentioned, even in terms of housing, we've all been experiencing the need for decent and affordable housing. And so the decisions that are made today are the ones that are going to impact us for the next 10 years. So that's why this is critically important in the midst of pandemic and economic downturns, to get a strong and full count of everybody, because we will pay the price ultimately. I think about healthcare, the work that we do in healthcare. Midtown Community Health Center services the majority of low-income people in Ogden, East Central Ogden, and West Ogden. Without federal dollars, they wouldn't be able to continue the work that they do on the level that is needed. I work in higher ed as well, and it was mentioned earlier about Pell Grants are determined. The amount of Pell Grants that come to the state ties directly in with the census. So not only are we encouraging older adults and heads of household to fill it out, but if you are a college student, a young adult that are living in your household, make sure that you get that census filled out, because it does impact you directly.
Wonderful, wonderful. I wanted to add real quick a little context to some of the points that the panelists have brought up. And I'll follow right along with Betty because those are fresh in my mind. The student loans. Based on the allocation we have for the state of Utah right now, there's almost $902 million allocated to student loans. And that gets chipped away at if we don't have participation. You know, she mentioned housing also. There's about 75 million in housing benefits for Section 8 that we would not receive if people do not fill out their census forms. When we talk about our children, our most precious asset, the impact there is great on children's programs. Child care, almost $60 million allocated to child care, 128 million to the health care for children allocated to our state, 99 million for the school lunch programs, and 89 million for the Title I grants for our schools. So you can start to see where it's important that we participate as citizens in the census, because these impacts are just, I mean, it can really be detrimental to us if we don't participate. So why is the Black community often missed so often in the census? And then we'll go back down in order again, and we'll have Miss Betty give us some insight here.
One of the historical factors has been the fact of mistrust in government. Anytime someone from the government comes, we are looking both ways to see if there's an ulterior motive here. So if we're not doing the proper education up front, people have a tendency to say, oh, here they go again. They want something from us. They're trying to get our information. And that's not totally the case. The census itself only takes about 10 minutes. I filled mine out in about 5 minutes for the household. So it's a small action that we could take that will impact us, like I said, for the next 10 years. But a part of the work that we do is help, one, dispel the myths about the census, knowing that even the census workers themselves have to declare an oath of not disclosing any of this information. So no one gets access to that information but the ones that actually need it. So again, dispelling those myths, encouraging us to take it. And we're in a mobile community too. And when I say mobile, because a lot of us are renters, our address changes, we move from place to place. And so through that mobility, if something was mailed, you might have missed it. And so that second wave of the census initiative, when enumerators come door to door, helps fill that gap that was missing during those kinds of transitions. But the good thing, if you don't want anybody coming to your door right now, then fill it out online, go over to Rose Park Connect, and get it done in less than 10 minutes.
Right. You know, one of the things when we talk about trust is how the system that exists in place tries to deter us from receiving all of these dollars. It was just Monday, this past Monday, that the Census Bureau announced that they were going to move the final date, closing date for the census by 30 days from September 30th, from October 31st to September 30th. Now, this puts some pressure on us as a community to get out there and make sure that we're filling out our census forms. One of you speak to the way that we can ask for urgency within the Black community, so that people understand that this is a critical crunch time for us to get out there. And as Miss Betty alluded to, we have an opportunity to do this without people knocking at our doors. So how do we create that urgency without folks worrying about people coming to your door and asking you to fill out the census in person?
One of those challenges for me would be, old school, each one reach one. And that would be our call to action tonight. Everybody go out there and help one other person to fill out the census. Everybody call, text, write, snap, whatever way you communicate with your friends. You better hurry up and use TikTok, or that may be gone. So, but whatever way you communicate with your friends and family, that's what we're asking you to do today, not tomorrow, but right now, today. And put a post with you calling someone or helping someone fill out that census.
And oh, go ahead, Jasmine.
Oh, and to just mimic what Miss Betty said is, for young people, right, like me, you're talking to your family members all of the time, have that conversation within your household. Are you taking the census? Why it's important, help your grandma, your aunt, whoever take the census. It's really easy to complete. You can do it, like she was saying, in 5 minutes, right? So just go out and do it.
And I want to add to that, I think we need to emphasize that we all pay taxes and we all pay in the federal government. Do you not want that money to come back to you? Because essentially, this is what it is. It is your money that you didn't pay it out coming back to the community in which you live to help educate and educate your kids and to do for your community and to make sure that you have good roads to drive on. Make sure that the transportation system fits your needs. Make sure that you're being taken care of healthcare wise. And so this is money that you've paid out. And I know for me, I love bringing home a dollar, my dollar that I have honestly earned. And I think the federal government shouldn't keep that money, that it should be back in my community doing good, which is what I would prefer my tax dollars to go.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that what Representative Hollins mentioned is that this is money that we've already put in as far as taxes. And, it takes a village to raise a child. And this is what I think about is like all of us are coming together. So we're depending on each other to fill out the census because we want all of us to be counted. And if one of us doesn't fill out the census, that's $1,800 that's out of the door that could have helped our community. And so it's not only your responsibility for your own family, but you're taking responsibility for other families around you as well. We all need to start coming together and unify to ensure that we, just like Betty was mentioning, calling up one by one and being sure that we're filling out the census. Share how easy it is to fill out the census. Walk people who are not familiar with the internet. Walk them through the process. I mean, it took me a household of 5. It took less than 5 minutes to fill out the census. It was real easy, made it real quick, and then we have facilities like Rose Park Connect. So if you don't have access to the internet, you can just go over there and fill it out. And there's plenty of people out there, other resources out there. We can just go online to 20census.gov and fill out the census. So we wanted to provide every access, so there's absolutely no excuse for our community to fill out the census. So we just need to be sure that we communicate that and the opportunity that exists when we do fill out the census.
Wonderful. We touched on some of the monetary impacts. But what other consequences are there for the Black community if we do not do this? And if we do not stretch ourselves to get out and fill out these census forms? It's been mentioned that it doesn't take a lot of time. So if we're going to avoid spending 5 or 10 minutes filling this out, there are some issues that come up that are going to significantly harm our community. Can any of you speak to those and those impacts again a little bit deeper as to how and what some things that maybe none of us even think about being impacted?
One of the things, if I may, we were talking about representation on a district and national level. And currently, we have legislation before us about redistricting. So other people are trying to draw lines to define how our communities will be represented and who will represent that community. So when we don't fill out the census and give a full count, it makes it easier for some of those funny looking lines to be drawn, and without us speaking up and having a say in what that representation looks like. One of the other critical things by not filling it out, again, as a local nonprofit, I depend upon government funding to do the Juneteenth Festival, to do community Kwanzaa celebration, to do after school programs, to do our outreach in health and wellness and diabetes awareness and those kinds of things. So I'm one of a few African American organizations that is doing this work. And so when you don't fill out the census, that impacts me directly and what I'm able to do, not only in the Ogden community, but a lot of the work that we do with Project Success is statewide. So we immediately see the impact of those programs, that representation. Sandra Hollins, Representative Hollins, is a lone force, a lone Black voice in the state legislature. Why does it have to be just one person? We don't have any congresspersons that are Black or people of color. Why is that the case? So, again, being able to impact getting additional seats in Congress is something that ties directly to us filling out or not filling out our census.
Great.
And,
I think a
can
lot of people, go ahead.
Oh, and I was going to say, can I bring that back specifically to the West Side community and some statistics? We talked about education and Title I schools. Currently on the West Side, I have 12 Title I schools just in my district. That's 12 Title I schools. I have 17% of the population on this side of town receiving public assistance. And I have 22% of the population between the age of 5 and 17, which means they're school age kids. The census can have a real impact on them. We're right now in talking about COVID-19. And I have a lot of individuals in my area with food insecurities. We need to fill out the census because that is going to impact all of that. It impacts the services that your kids are receiving in schools. It impacts their lunch and their food program. It impacts the quality of education that they're getting. And so as we're talking about all of this on the West Side, let's remember that all of us want quality education. I think that's one thing we all have in common, regardless of your race or culture or economic income. We want quality education. And if you want quality education for your kids, this is something very, very simple that you can do that takes less than 5 minutes.
That's a very small investment to get to that, isn't it? You mentioned the situation we're in right now with COVID, and I think about the health disparities for the Black community. The census actually accounts for $5 million for Medicare. So those that are most impacted based on the stats that we're seeing in the Black community as far as age and health disparities are impacted greatly. We could use those funds. There's $35 million in healthcare centers. Without those funds, we don't have those healthcare centers to be able to service our communities. So it's really critical that we think about all these, impacts that people don't really realize that this touches. And I think it's important that, we continue in our community over the next month and a half, 2 months we have, I believe, to really illustrate and illuminate these things to our community. So how is the, Ms. Betty mentioned it, having people, reach and touching one another interpersonally, but how can we really emphasize the fact that, there's so much information out there about the census, but as a community, we're not seeing it. And there's a few folks out there that, like myself, that try to share it, and we get very little response. Any of you think of any ideas of how we can improve that so that we can get people to feel safe and realize this small investment will make a world of difference for our community if they just fill out the form?
One of the things that being born and raised here in Utah, one of our strengths is how well we can work together. Just recently, a lot of the Black organizations within Utah, I think almost about a dozen of us came together and put a Utah Black Voters Matter campaign. Just all of us coming together, sharing strategies on how we can get out the initiative and vote, and working on that strategy. And I think it's the same thing we should we will be doing with the census is we have, over a dozen and counting Black organizations within Utah, and we all understand the importance of the census, and we're constantly communicating with our community. And even though there's overlap, and there's no such thing when it comes to the census, there's no such thing as over communicating. Betty's with Project Success, and then I come in with the Black Chamber, Representative Hans, and with her sorority and all the other organizations she's a part of. Then Jasmine Walton comes in, who continue this constant communication about the census, using all the organizations that we are affiliated with or know of, and getting that message out. I think will be powerful.
Wonderful, yeah. Wonderful. I want to interject here real quick for those that are, how do I fill out my census form? It's real simple. You can go online to my2020census.gov and fill out the form right there. And again, it's very simple. There's only, I believe, 10 questions. I did it the first week it was out there. But again, there's some urgency here because of the date being moved up. And we need to get people to fill out the census. So again, it's my2020census.gov. Does anyone want to talk about how our faith community can help? I know that the faith communities are really strong among the Black population, and I know that people hear about the census a little bit at church, but how can people correlate their faith along with their responsibility to have to fill out the census? Anybody have anything to add to that?
I would say that the faith community is critical in this effort. And as James was sharing about pulling together the coalition to vote, that same type of effort has to be done for this. The Utah Black Roundtable, a part of our census effort and following the NAACP model, we could push out Census Sunday, or if you get together on Friday for your religious and spiritual encounters, it could be Census Friday or Census Thursday, whatever day of the week that is. We can do targeted efforts over the next few weeks around census seniors, making sure our senior population is filling out the census, and the same thing for our college students. And I know at Weber and probably every institution has put together a push to get those college students to do it. But I think by directly reaching out to our faith community, giving them the script and the information, and just asking them, because many of them are doing virtual services right now. So it'd be easy to put a plug and for us to send, an image where they can go, or a bar scan to go on that site immediately and give their congregation, that 5-minute break to fill out the census. You had mentioned with the sororities, we have several sororities and fraternities in the state. And again, it could be that sorority day or fraternity day where we make sure that we are making that extra push.
Wonderful, wonderful. There was a question that came in over Facebook about what type of outreach is being done to ensure that new Americans are being counted. And again, that points to the fear that people have of the census form itself. And I'll answer that a little bit, but then I want my panel to take a stab at it as well. One of the things that we had to examine in the Black community is that we have a very large African community. And a lot of times they have some communication barriers or fear barriers as well in being counted in the census. Does anybody here on the panel have any insights as to how we might reach some of those folks a lot more readily?
So I think, just to give my 2 cents here, right? I think a way to start reaching out to those communities is just like we in the Black community have all of our various organizations, the New American community also has their organizations as well. And it's coming together, like we've been saying, and connecting and saying, hey, how can we strategically push this out to both of our communities and make this a larger effort than just putting that on one or two individual organizations to really do the effort, right? So it's just connecting and finding out who those players in those communities are and getting them to come to the table.
Yes, and I agree with what Jasmine just said. You know, we who I guess I'll call old Americans, um, we're skeptical about the government. And so we have these individuals who are new Americans who have, over the last 4 years, listened to all of this rhetoric and have been frightened about what is being said about them and what it will mean if they fill out this paperwork. And I think part of that is reaching out to the community leaders. I think you first have to gain the trust of the community leaders, and then go from there. And talk to them about the importance of filling out this information and try to reassure them that that this is not going to impact their citizenship, that they are American citizens, but we need to have this counter view so that we are able to better support you in our communities.
That's great. Well, another issue that has come up, especially since COVID has taken over, is access to both computers and the internet. Prior to the COVID situation we were in, there was a big effort in having libraries advertise that they're available to people come in and fill out their census forms. Other public places would allow people to come in and fill out their census forms. How do we mitigate the fact that we can't do that now? I know the mayor mentioned some new hotspots and new computers, but we have a very short window here, and people that are just getting this technology are going to have a learning curve to just figure out how to get things working right off the bat. So maybe some members in the community can benefit from us kind of giving them some insights as to how to mitigate that and how to take advantage of opportunities that they have right in their hand, literally speaking, with their phones, and not being fearful of using those devices to actually fill out their forms. Anybody else have any insight there?
I would say, first of all, again, making sure people know that we have a couple of places on the west side of Salt Lake at the Rose Park Connect and the Sorensen Center, where they can go and get assistance and use devices and have internet to fill that out. One of the other things that we may be able to look at over the next few weeks, in Ogden, we have our farmers market, and we have voter registration that we're involved in there. So maybe we could take our laptops and be ready to support people filling out the census in those places. If we're having any other special events, we've had a number of rallies. And for me, anytime I raise an issue, I want to be there to help build a solution. And so while we're out and about in those spaces, to make sure that we are prepared and use that opportunity to promote the census and assist people at that time. We're doing our Juneteenth in September. We did it in June, but we're going to be doing an event at the Ogden Amphitheater on September the 19th. And we'll definitely focus on census as well as the vote, because we know we just lost Representative Congressman John Lewis recently. And one of the major platforms that he had his entire life was that about the vote, and talking about how precious the vote is and even sacred. And I think the vote and the census go hand in hand.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else have any insights? Okay, wonderful. I'm getting everybody being shy now.
Shawn, I'd just like to add a fun thing about the census. We're talking about these really deep impacts of the census, but I've been a part of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Association. So just recently, the other night, I'm doing some of my family history. And that's the major documents that I was able to pull up: the 1890 census and 1840 census, and actually seeing the names of my ancestors, aunts and uncles and great grandparents written down in those documents, and said, they could read, they could write, they own a farm, all of those things. So I got excited just knowing that this record, while it supports all of these economic and educational issues for us now, it also provides that record for us to go back and tell our story and connect with our roots.
Oh, that's beautiful. Maybe I should have done that. I think those
That
connections
reminds
are
me.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Betty makes a good point to how to reemphasize the importance of filling out the census. Think about the last 10 years and how the community has benefited, or even the last 20 years. Think of how our community's benefited from being counted. And representation during those last times were pretty low. We want to increase that even more this year. So think about how this decision of not filling out the census is going to impact you and your community for the next 10 years. That's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about a whole decade of decision here. And so that's why it's so important now to make a quick 5-minute decision by going to my2020census.gov, going to the Source and Tech Center or to the Rose Park Connect, and take your time and fill out that census, because this decision is a 10-year decision.
Yes, indeed. Representative Hollins touched on something I think is really important for people to understand about the census, and with infrastructure. Our transportation, there's a lot of people in our community that don't own automobiles, that have to count on public transportation to get them places. We have to count on those of us that have cars and drive, have to count on roads. We have to count on bridges. These are things that really impact our livelihoods. If we cannot travel and we cannot move, the society we live in today, we're going to be hampered as far as our mechanisms for survival. So can anybody else touch on any impacts they see, especially for the Black community, when it comes to infrastructure and facilities, aside from health, which we kind of touched on? But these are critical things to consider, and these are things that people don't consider when we're looking at the census, but that really have a huge impact on our community.
And let me bring another piece into that as we're talking about transportation. One of the big push that we have in this state is clean air. And the way to have clean air is to use public transportation and to have an adequate bus system that's in each community, which will cut down on us driving our cars, which will have a big impact on the air quality in this state. My community on the west side, I know we have been impacted by poor air quality. And we have new infrastructures that is going up that we're worried that what's going to be the environmental impact on us. And I know I have a large number of individuals in my community with asthma, which has a great impact. So another reason to fill out the census is so that we can look at getting better transportation, which is going to help improve air quality over in this district.
That's great points.
Along with that, I would add, as we talk about infrastructure and building roads and highways and bridges to make all of those things safer, to increase access, all of those are tied to employment and jobs as well. So when those funds, it's not just looking at the dollars that are spent on those things, but the fact that you're developing an infrastructure for people to have longer term employment and employment that pays above minimum wages and things of that nature as well.
Wonderful. As we're talking about parts of the census that most people don't think of, I wanted to direct something to James. We look at the census, and there's currently about $19 million allocated to hub zones. So we talk about entrepreneurship, which a lot of times historically, Black communities have had entrepreneurs, but were unable to get funding. James, can you give me a little insight as to how that would impact, entities like the Black Chamber or entrepreneurs overall by having or utilizing some of these hub zone funds?
We experienced that over those last couple of months with COVID, right? When we saw the disparity as far as access to the PPP loans, access to having a banking relationship, access to those funds, and so when there's other opportunities like grants that do come up, they're quickly gone. And we saw that happen with there's only so many resources that the state is given providing those grants to small businesses. The Black Chamber gets contacted all the time about businesses looking for grants. And for a lot, since the recession, when the recession happened, there were several years we told them there are no grants available. So we worked hard to educate them and teach them how to apply for loans. And a lot of Black businesses are bootstrapping away and not really applying for loans. They're just always cash, especially when you talk about the new Americans, where a lot of their different cultures there don't do loans. And so and when the PPP loan came out, where they were really torn because a grant was put in a loan. And so, culturally, it wasn't acceptable for them to fill out a loan application, even though it was a grant specified for certain types of expenses to use during a business. So when we look at the hub zone grants become available and other grants that could possibly become available based upon the numbers we have within the Black community, we can start seeing more grants start coming through, and the chamber can continue educating and make them aware of those type of resources as available. We want to continue to be that hub for the Black businesses, and we spent almost 11 years now developing relationships with the small business development centers and the city and county economic development departments and the libraries and all these other different resources that are available. But in order to provide the specific capital, we have to do more than just the loans. We have to find these small grant opportunities. Where even the chamber is looking at like a revolving loan fund or a grant capital program that we just put out for Black women-owned businesses. But government is important because those resources come from the community themselves, and and those funds only go so far.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to interject on that? Can I ask a quick question or kind of fire things up a little bit? We talk about the enumerators going out into our communities. With the situation we're in right now, these enumerators are going to be wearing masks. They're going to be, most of them will probably have on street clothes. And other than their government badge to identify themselves, some of our community members may be fearful of fraud or people impersonating these enumerators. It's important that you understand that as a community, that they will have ID badges on them. Anybody that comes to your door, I would suggest that you demand to see their ID badge, a federal government ID badge, prior to allowing those people. You don't even really have to allow them in your house. You can go on the porch, since we won't be in wintertime, but to make sure that you're safe. And that's something that we want to emphasize, because as you well know, there are people that take advantage of times like these, to take advantage of people, especially some of our older community members. So I just wanted to throw that in there to think about the safety factor when these enumerators come around.
And one thing to add to that, Shawn, remember, like, they're not going to ask you for your bank account information. And if they start asking you for that type of personal information, then they're probably not legitimate people.
Excellent, excellent. And
along with that,
oh, go ahead, Miss Betty.
Along with that, Shawn, I think they'll be coming out as soon as next week. I think somewhere I read the 11th. So it's another opportunity for us to share with our community, be on the lookout for them, or even better yet, tonight, fill out your census, then you won't have to worry about them stopping at at your door, but they're on their way, they're coming. And again, it is critically important that we get counted. Even in Utah, we're always undercounted. I know we look at the demographics, and you look at one report, they'll say we're 1%. The next report, they'll say we're 2%, or 20,000 or 30,000. And a way for us, again, and James uses that information when you're trying to get people to invest in what you're doing. They want to know what the impact is. If I invest this number of dollars, how far is that reach? And if our numbers don't reflect a significant reach, they may not be willing to invest in the work that we're doing. And so we need to have a great count for ourselves, as well as for these systems of government that are impacted by this information.
Thank you. Well said. I want to tap Jasmine on the shoulder a little bit. And you mentioned it earlier about how to, or the importance of reaching young people. I want some instances that how. I mean, I like to think I'm hip and I like to think I'm cool and I'm keeping up, but I'm way off. Those are just my actions. So if you could give us some insight as to how we might be able to get the younger generations understanding the importance of filling out the census and understand how they can do that, because a lot of the young people understand that if they're in college and they're not living in their household, the parents aren't going to count them, and they're not really, is that right? They're not supposed to count them. They're supposed to count themselves, or the parents can't count them, right? Which way is it?
So I believe it's that your parents don't count you because you're not living in the household. But there are a lot of, especially here in Utah, there are a lot of college students that commute to and from school. So if you're still living at home with mom and dad should count you if you live there by April 1st. But if you have moved out prior to or after April 1st, then you should count yourself and do your own household. And that means even if you're living with roommates, you count them as well on your census. To bring it back to what you said about how you get them to understand the importance and get that information out to them, I think it is a lot of the social media, right? A lot of people my age in their early 20s and are constantly on their Facebook, on Instagram, on right now TikTok, probably still have it, right? And so I think it's just pushing that out there, having people that they can relate to, right? That look like them, talking about why this is important, how this impacts them with their Pell Grants if you're a recipient of that. So it's really just getting down to their level, I think, and getting them fired up about how this is going to impact them over the next 10 years.
Great. And hopefully if you're living with a couple of roommates, you're telling roommates, hey, we need to do this, and, making sure everybody's participating.
Yeah, everybody go to brunch and pull your phone out and complete the census.
And can I just add a little anecdote to that? So a lot of young people, you may be 18 and 19 years old now, but in 10 years, you're going to be 29, and this is going to be impacting you differently than it's impacting you now. So just think about that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. You got to think about your future. 18, 19, you can be, we live in Utah. So 28, 29, you can be married with a few children. And so that little extra dollars will come in handy.
Another point that when we talk about young people that I wanted to get across is our most undercounted demographic are children 5 and under. And I've yet to understand why that was the case. I attended an event in Galveston with all of the chosen people from the Black community through the census. And that was a demographic or a population that I had no idea that people wouldn't count their children under 5. For some reason, they assumed that they're not already in school, that it didn't count against the census. So I implore everybody out there to count your young children as well, because that's important for us to be able to get the dollars that we're looking for.
Utah has a very young population. And so it's definitely important that we make sure people know counting everyone that's in that household.
Yes, indeed. So as leaders, and that you are because you're here today, I'm just going to give you that title. um, how is it that you navigate this space when people approach you about the census? When they approach you with their fears, they approach you with their angst about letting the government know who they are, where they are, and how many people live in their house. How do we mitigate some of those fears? When some of the people that count on us or come to us for advice, um, how do we tell them this is important without pointing the finger at them and pushing them and dragging them and putting a pin in their hand?
I try to understand where they're coming from, and I don't try to belittle their fears. But I also inform them the government already knows who you are. They know where you are. They already have that information on you. If you have a cell phone, people know where you are because it's binging off of towels every time you move around this state. And so filling out this one form is not going to really make that big a difference. But I let them know I do understand your fears, but the government already probably know where you are.
Thank you, Representative Hollins. I just didn't want to say that. So anybody else want to add?
I'm always willing to say what everybody else is thinking.
Because that was definitely what
How
I
do you
was
reach
thinking.
people?
And if you have social media, your information is out there. I looked up my name the other day, and all kind of stuff started popping up. Videos I was a part of, 20 years ago. It's like, wait a minute, this is just too much information. So
Mhm.
like Sandra, tell them, yeah, I recognize your and they're valid. However, this is an opportunity for us to get a return for a change on that information versus just having it out there for free. By filling out the census, at least you get something back, that some of those dollars that were already yours, some of those tax dollars that you've already put into the system, you get some of that back that can help you and your family and your community.
Before we get out of here tonight, I just wanted to remind everybody how to fill out their census. You can go to my2020census.gov, or you can do it by telephone. If you're telephoning in by English, in English, dial 844-330-2020. Or for a Spanish version, dial 844-468-2020. Again, the English version by phone is 844-330-2020. And for a Spanish version, it's 844-468-2020. And hopefully that's helpful and we can get more people to get on there and get this completed. It's really important to our community as we've discussed today. Any last parting thoughts from our panelists? Considerations that you may want people to take in and understand or get over, so to make sure that we can improve this process?
I remember when I was in school, back in like elementary school, there was a team captains, and they were picking who was going to be on their team, and you were just excited and just waited to be chosen. And I admit, when they were choosing for basketball, I was a frail little guy, and so I was either the last one to be chosen, or I wasn't one chosen at all, and I had to watch from the sidelines. If you don't put in your census, you're going to be watching from the sidelines, looking at all the other cities and counties and states take advantage of the opportunities while you sit on the sidelines because you didn't fill out the census and lose out on being able to play in that game. And so that's what I think about when you don't play in the census. So don't voluntarily sit on the sideline. This is your opportunity to go in, fill out that 5-minute application, and so you can be in the same game as everybody else is.
And I think to add to that, right now there's so much conversation around change and wanting to see that change happen now. And I think the census is the first step to seeing those changes happen in real time. So go online and complete your census.
And along with that, as Jasmine said, this is our opportunity to be the change that we want to see. And it starts right now. It starts with doing these simple but important acts of democracy. And we get to do that, filling out the census, and we get to vote. And so be the change that we want to see. It's great to protest, but after the protesting is over, then we have to put our faith in action. We have to put our commitment in action. And this is one of the ways that we can do that by going to my2020census.gov and filling out the census.
And I would like to add to that. I have always have people asking me, how can we support you? Tell us what you need. And that's people in my district and also people in the Black community. I would like to tell them, if you want to support me, two things. Number one, vote. Please vote. Number two, fill out the census. Those are our civic duties, that two of the most important civic duties that can help me. Do those two things, and with the census, let's bring that money back into our community to improve it.
Wonderful. I want to thank all of our panelists tonight. I want to thank our LaShonda, who is our ASL assistant here this evening. And I want to thank the entire team behind the scenes that helped us to bring this to our community. And I hope that you gathered a lot from this, from hearing from the leaders in our community, and also being able to share via some of your comments here on Facebook Live. And I hope that you get out there tonight, don't wait, and fill out your 2020 census. Thank you very much and have a great evening.